For a bit of context, I worked at a gas station in the backwoods of Tennessee, and that's where this happened about 2 years ago now when I clocked in for work at 8:00 p.m. The store was completely dead. I figured it was going to be a pretty easy night because the road this station is on is not a main road. It actually used to be one up until about a decade ago when a new freeway was built. This led to basically every business that was here to pack up and leave their old building abandoned. Thanks to that, there are a lot of abandoned buildings on that stretch of road that local druggies tend to claim as their own. Anyways, at around 11 p.m., I had only an hour, and so I figured I should actually get some work done. Instead of just sitting around and doing nothing, I worked the shift alone, which is nice because it meant I could do pretty much whatever I wanted. This was normally pretty great because I could sit on my phone as long as I got what I needed to get done. Finished before the end of my shift, I noticed that we were almost out of barbecue chips, and so I needed to get some from our storage space, which for some reason is in the basement of the gas station. I always hated going down there because it gave me the creeps. Why the owner decided to store everything down there is beyond my comprehension anyways. I got about halfway down the steps before something fell on the other side of the basement, and it sounded like footsteps were coming my way. I sprinted up the stairs and locked the door to the basement, panicking. When I got back upstairs, I went behind the counter to the store computer so I could check the security cameras. I flicked over to the one that looked into the basement, and there was this guy just standing there, smiling up into the camera. He had a look of absolute insanity in his eyes, but he didn't look like the average junkie. In the area, he was clean-shaven and dressed in what appeared to be jeans and a button-up of some kind. If he'd walked into the store, I wouldn't have bet an eye, but because he was down there just looking into the camera, smiling, it really shook me up. I called the store owner, and at first he was pretty mad that I called him in the middle of the night, but once he heard how freaked out I was, his tone changed. He told me he'd be there in 15 minutes and to just lock the main door to the store and make sure that the man didn't go anywhere. I asked him if I should call the police, but for some reason he didn't want me to do that just yet. I locked the entrance to the gas station and went back to looking at the man. He was still there, just smiling up at me. About 3 or so minutes of him staring at me later, and he walked out of view of the camera. My boss showed up soon after, armed with a shotgun, and when I let him in, he immediately went to the basement. I went with him because I felt safe with there being another person there, especially since he had a gun, but we found nothing. My boss ultimately chalked it up to me being tired and hallucinating, but I know that I saw the man. It's so strange to me how the owner didn't want me to call the police, but maybe he felt confident enough to deal with the issue himself, or he didn't trust the police. Maybe I'll never know, now as I don't work at that gas station anymore. Late at night, my boyfriend and I were driving home from Universal Studios in Orlando. We were routed away home. We never went before, and we're traveling in basically the middle of nowhere. My boyfriend's gas gauge is broken on his car, and he has to press the button to reset the miles after he gets gas. So he's always careful to fill up on gas before it gets super close to empty, just to be safe. We were driving on a deserted road in the middle of absolute nowhere, with not a single car in sight. My boyfriend realized that we hit the 130 millions mark and he wanted to fill up on gas, but there was literally no gas in sight. I searched for a gas station nearby and we found one, but it turned out to be closed in a hurry. We found another gas station 5 minutes up the road. This is where the story gets weird. When we pulled up to the gas station, I had a horrible thought about something going wrong there. I pushed it aside because I knew we needed gas, and AAA was not an option where we were at the moment. The gas station lights were dim, and half of them weren't. Even working, the road we were on was literally a dead end with a gas station on it, and the only way to leave was the way we came in, unless there were some small side roads I wasn't seeing in the dark. My boyfriend got out of the car to see if we could get gas, and the feeling intensified. I saw a white car pulling up to the road to make a left. Keep in mind, there's literally no one else on this road. The white car pulled up, noted my boyfriend, and the man driving backed up with his windows down. I found this very strange because My boyfriend has a nicer sports car, and my mind immediately went into panic mode. I started screaming his name, and the man realized that someone else was in the car and turned left and sped off. Sadly, I didn't get his license plate because of how dark it was. The situation frightened me more than you can even imagine. It may not seem too scary, but it was easily one of the most terrifying things to watch, because I didn't know if I was going to witness my boyfriend being robbed at gunpoint or something like that. The feeling and thought that I had just 10 minutes earlier was what also made the situation even worse. We eventually found a gas station with actual human life around and made it home safe and sound. Once I got home, my dad told me that the road we were driving on was famous for many bodies being found on it. I hope no one traveling alone ends up in a similar situation that we were in that night. This happened about years ago when I was at the time lived in a kind of strange city with a decently high crime rate. It was more of an industrial town, and the only things close by were a U-Haul gas station, grocery store, and a bunch of construction or manufacturing type businesses. My partner worked at the 7-Eleven, just a half mile or so up the road. I drove him to work and picked him up, since he worked the night shift, and I didn't feel comfortable letting him walk to and from work. It was around midnight or so, one of his work nights, and he asked me to come and visit since they weren't extremely busy, and this is something I do semi-frequently, basically getting there early to pick him up and hang out the side of. The building where I parked was in a blind spot as far as surveillance goes, but I parked there to free up parking in the front of the building since I anticipated on staying a while. There weren't a ton of vehicles, only a few, scattered around the parking lot, including a white, fairly new-looking pickup truck near where I had parked. A man, probably around his late 30s or early 40s, was standing near the truck, and I had to walk past him to get into the building. When I went to walk by, he stopped me by standing partially in the walkway. At first, I wasn't super uncomfortable, just moderately annoyed, since I don't enjoy talking to strangers. He started telling me how his truck wasn't working and he couldn't get it to start. I didn't really question it and dismissed him by saying I knew nothing about cars, so there was nothing that I could do to help. He was pretty persistent after this, asking me to come and look, telling me how it just wouldn't work, and how he needed my help by this point. I was pretty weirded out since I had said at least 2 or 3 times that I knew nothing about cars, so I didn't see how I could be helpful in any way. He also asked me what I was doing out this late, and I told him my boyfriend worked there and I was coming to visit. He looked noticeably uncomfortable. When I said that, I took my chance and quickly walked into the gas station and got my partner to come out without any hesitation. The guy jumped into his truck and immediately sped off, like suspiciously fast. All in all, it was just super weird. I don't want to know what would have happened if I had gotten closer to his vehicle, since it was clearly working just fine. Nothing ever came of it, and I didn't get the license plate number since I would have had to go around back of his truck, which I never did. He reversed and just sped down the dark road, so there was no way to see it as he was leaving either. Overall, I always get creeped out at gas stations, and I'm glad that we moved away from that town and my boyfriend doesn't work at a gas station anymore. Last year, I went to Delaware for spring break. I know, not the most exotic location, but I was visiting family, so it was a good time after a week. It was time for me to head back to my school in Alabama, being the college student I decided to pull an all-nighter and just drive straight through to Alabama. I stopped at a friend's house in North Carolina for about 2 hours. But other than that, the trip was made in one sitting. It was around 145 in the morning and I was in the middle of nowhere, Virginia. I was on a pretty desolate stretch of interstate and almost out of gas at this point. I should probably mention that I had my dog Casey with me. Casey is a 100 lb Labber Doodle with the sweetest and most mellow disposition I've ever encountered in a dog. I decided to pull off at the next exit so that Casey could stretch his legs and that I could fill up my tank. The exit I chose was a pretty poor choice. There was nothing along the road, with the exception of a small gas station on the adjacent recent highway. The station appeared to be closed, but the lights at the pumps were on, and the parking lot was empty. So I pulled up beside a pump, unloaded Casey, and started filling my tank no more. Then a minute after I pulled into the gas station, several giant SUVs and one large black van pulled into the parking lot. Now normally this wouldn't have been an issue, but I was an 18-year-old girl traveling alone and unarmed. A bunch of young, middle-aged men spilled out of the various vehicles, and I was starting to get a little nervous. My phone was essentially dead. My car was only half filled and there was no one else around. I noticed a few of the guys shooting glances at me, and that made me seriously uncomfortable. But the real kicker came when Casey started to growl. Like I said, he's a really nice dog, he never barks, and I think that it might have been the first time I'd ever heard him growl. That's when I decided to sit in my car with the doors locked while the gas finished pumping. While I was sitting there, I watched as at least 15 men walked by my car, glanced through the windshield at me, and disappeared behind the empty gas station. At least 2 of them smiled at me in a way that made my skin crawl when I heard the click of the pump shutting off. You better believe I flew out of that car, threw the nozzle back into its proper place, and floored it to get away from there. I have no idea what those guys were doing in an empty gas station at 4:45 in the morning. While I was there, they never filled up their cars. They just went behind the building, and I didn't stick around long enough to see them come out. My best guess is some sort of drug deal maybe, but there were so many men there that it seemed unlikely. I'm just glad they didn't make any advances on me. Whether it was because I had a dog or they just had other business, I don't know. But it made me realize how truly vulnerable I was in that situation, since there were so many of them, despite my normal kindness to see the good in people. I think I avoided a bad situation at a gas station. Recently, it was around 4 a.m. In the early winter, it was cold outside, but there was no snow on the ground yet. I was going into work early that day and had driven about minutes and noticed that my gas tank was low. No big deal. I had plenty of time. I went to a well-lit gas station with 3 or 4 other cars at the pumps. There was a man hanging out next to a beat-up old full-sized van next to the store. I was a little weary of him as I pulled in, because these types of people usually roam a gas station a lot, telling their sob story to whoever they meet, which leads to the inevitable request for money. I glanced at him as I drove past, but I don't think he noticed me. I parked next to a pump, got out of my car, and was greeted by hip-hop music blasting over the overhead speakers at what must have been close to, if not full volume. There was normally 1 employee working in the gas station, so they must have been taking advantage of the lack of supervision. I prepaid at the pump, took the nozzle off and placed it into my car. Right before I squeezed the trigger, I heard a man's voice cutting over the music. I looked towards the station, and I saw the man who had been loitering approaching me. I didn't understand what he was trying to say, so I beckoned him closer, second-guessing myself the entire time here. I was beckoning what was most likely some panhandler over to me, questioning why I do these type of things. He got close enough to where I could hear him. He was asking me if I had jumper cables, which initially was a relief to hear. Parking lot beggars don't start with that, and clearly he wasn't asking for money. He genuinely needed help, a pretty common problem too, especially in the winter. Who hasn't had a car battery die on them at the worst possible time? I told him I unfortunately did not have jumper cables, which was true. I had just started driving this car and hadn't had a chance to put them in the trunk yet. Then he asked me if I could call his girlfriend for him to come and pick him up so we could get to work, as his prepaid phone was out of minutes. I obliged, and he gave me the number, and I dialed it. After several rings, I got a recording telling me that the mailbox was full and could not receive any new messages. There was no greeting or anything, just the stock message that's set up on a brand new phone. Next, he gave me a new number without missing a beat. I called it, and it was the same story with the full mailbox. I called it, and it was the same story with the full mailbox. That's when I started feeling a bit uneasy, and I wished that I wouldn't have gone this far into helping this guy out. Then he asked me if I could give him a ride to his car. Up until this point, I thought that the van he had been standing near was his vehicle. He told me his car was up the road about a mile at another gas station. I know the gas station he was talking about. It's on a main road, but it's old and set into some overgrowth, and most importantly, it was closed. It's not a 24-hour gas station like most of them are these days. It was closed and had been for many hours now. He continued explaining to me that he left his car at that gas station, borrowed a bicycle, and rode down to this station to look for help. Things weren't adding up. Why would his car be at a gas station that wasn't open, who was lending out bicycles in the middle of the night in the early winter, despite all these alarm bells going off? I didn't know how to disengage from this conversation, stupidly. Agreed to take him to his car. He was thankful and said that he was going to take the bike into the station so that the owner could retrieve it there without it getting stolen. In the meantime, the second he turned his back on me, my mind finally caught up and I realized how dumb what I was about to do was and that it could end poorly. I pulled the nozzle out of my car and put it back on the pump. I ran to my driver's side door, got in the car, started it, and drove out of the station as fast as I could. I didn't even look back to see if the man saw me leave. Part of me still feels guilty, just in case this guy actually needed help, and I ditched him after giving him so much hope, but my instincts tell me otherwise, and I think I did the right thing, even though I did lead him on a bit by helping him for so long. I wish I could have shut down the conversation earlier for